Michigan football has not been talked about the whole show. I have not talked about Michigan at length for the better part of a month. That was a promise to a buddy. The moratorium is over. Eventually the season was going to get here, and eventually we were going to have to talk about Michigan. I was thinking the other day, as I was watching the movie Twister, which is, for my money, one of the greatest pieces of American cinema ever created. But then I had it in the back of my mind, and I was working on some Michigan stuff the other day, and it came to me that Jim Harbaugh has been living out the plot to Twister for his entire tenure at Michigan. If you remember Bill Paxton and Twister, and you remember that story arc, you need only apply it to Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and you realize these are the same people. One's real, one's a character, but these are the same people. And if you have never seen Twister, shame on you. Do yourself a favor. If you have seen Twister, I want you to sit back for a second, wherever you are. If you're driving around, don't close your eyes, but take yourself with me on a little journey for the next few minutes, and I want you to think about how uncanny the parallels are between Bill Paxton and Twister and Jim Harbaugh, real-life Uncle Jim at the University of Michigan. And this story does not have a conclusion to it. You know how Twister ends. We don't know how the Michigan story ends. First point, do you remember at the beginning of Twister, Bill returns. He's gone off to be a weatherman. He's left the storm chasing in his rearview mirror, but he's back. He returns to the chase life. He's got Dorothy on the back of the truck. They're going to try and get her up in a tornado so that they can learn a lot more about atmospheric science. We'll learn more in 10 seconds than we have in the past 30 years, was his line. Everyone was happy and overjoyed. Everyone viewed that as a fresh start. I remember where I was when I heard about Jim Harbaugh being hired at Michigan. I remember making such foolish statements as Urban Meyer, boy, he's about to hear footsteps really quick. I even equated it, friends, believe it or not, I'm man enough to admit it, I even equated Jim Harbaugh entering the Big Ten via Michigan to Nick Saban entering the SEC via Alabama as it related to Urban Meyer. I thought Jim Harbaugh was going to have that kind of impact at Michigan. Well, there is no need to do the spoiler alert here. We have seen him so far go winless against Ohio State. But that's only one chapter. That's only the very beginning. Everything's bright. Everything's rosy. It is sunshine and rainbows right now. And then we start to get a little bit into the movie, and Bill starts to flex. He wants to show he's not rusty, and so they get in their first tornado chase of the day. Very rare day where you get like half a dozen tornadoes out there near Wauketa, Oklahoma. And so he grabs Helen Hunt's seatbelt, says, fasten your seatbelt, and he takes him off-road. Now, granted, this is only an F1, but F1s can still do damage if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jim Harbaugh flexed too, just like Bill Paxton did to start this movie. Jim Harbaugh flexed. I was in Columbus, Georgia, when Jim Harbaugh went on his satellite campaign, his satellite camp campaign, to put a finer point on it. There I am in the newsroom one day, and Jim Harbaugh is doing a satellite camp in nearby Prattville, Alabama. It's just north of Montgomery. And oh man, all the Southern folks were up in arms. I mean, they were grade A triggered by this. And then Harbaugh shows up on your local news, shirtless, running around in khakis. It's 95 degrees in Prattville in the summer, at least. And he's running around shirtless in khakis over there, playing some kind of bastardized version of football. I'm not quite sure what they were doing. But everyone was bent out of shape, and Jim Harbaugh was flexing, and there were some people that were misguided enough to believe that the University of Michigan was about to fundamentally change recruiting in the South because Jim Harbaugh ran around with saggy nipples in Prattville, Alabama for the better part of an afternoon. Again, a spoiler, it didn't quite work out that way, although Michigan has made a little bit of noise. Nico Collins, for example, from Clay Chalkville, that's a big-time receiver talent that they ended up pulling. So it was not without merit. They ended up putting the kibosh on it, but it wasn't without merit. We continue to chapter 3, because here come the clouds a little bit. As the story develops, Bill, back on the storm chasing scene, is reintroduced to his old nemesis, his old foe Jonas. Jonas Miller, he's a night crawler. They all started out together, but then Jonas went out and got himself some corporate sponsors. Remember why? Because he was in it for the money, not the science. It sounds about like some of you trying to expand these conferences, by the way. Well, how does this parallel Jim Harbaugh? Well, Jim Harbaugh ran up against his old nemesis too. Just as Bill Paxton was reintroduced to Jonas Miller, the nightcrawler there, we also had Jim Harbaugh get right back in the middle of that Ohio State rivalry after being checked out for a while. and it hurt. And they got their nose bloodied, and they were competitive, but they still came out on the wrong end. And so early on, we start to see a little up and a little down. We got a little ebb and a little flow. It's not supposed to be easy. We understand that, okay? It's early. It's still fine. We're still very early on in the tenure, and once we get Michigan built the way that Jim Harbaugh can build Michigan, and we've got everything under his thumbprint, it's going to be okay. It's a long game. Believe in the process. We'll eventually bypass him. And so what we need is we need the reset, right? And so one of the most beautifully constructed scenes in Twister or any movie is the timeout they take when they go to Aunt Meg's house. And if you've ever watched a Ronco Grill infomercial late at night and you just watch them do the set it and forget it, and then they pull the finished product out of the oven and you just salivate, and then you go to Crystal because it's 2 a.m. and there's nowhere else to go. That's what it was like watching those steak and eggs and mashed potatoes, and Meg's Gravy is its own food group, according to the late Philip Seymour Hoffman. That scene was great, mouth-watering, and it was a reset. You got some bad tornado experience early in the day. That's cool. Sometimes you just got to reset. Well, what did Jim Harbaugh do to reset? Well, he took his team to Rome. They just packed up over the course of a spring, and they said, spring football so yesterday. No. We're going to Rome. We got a donor up here that's willing to fit the bill. I think it was like $700,000 or $800,000. That's even more than Colin makes. And they go to Rome. And a lot of people were up in arms about it. I don't know why, but they were doing something different. It was the great Michigan football reset. We're going to brand ourselves. We're a national brand, and we're going to show you even maybe we can be an international brand. So while Bill Paxton enjoyed Meg's famous gravy, Jim Harbaugh just went to Rome and took his entire team with him. So this is where it really gets good. Because there is some drama that eventually arises, and it's domestic drama. It's the worst kind of drama. It gets really tough because they got to leave Aunt Meg's house early because they got one, F2, F3. They got to get on the road. It's going to be hilly terrain, and it's a jumper, and it's tough, and they can't get Dorothy up in the funnel, but something worse happens. There is a very dramatic and very raw scene between Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt right there as the sensors roll down the hill and the pack is wasted, and for the first time, we realize there is trouble in paradise, and there's a lot more going on here than just trying to chase tornadoes. That domestic squabble, that's the worst kind of squabble. And let me tell you what the worst kind of drama is for the University of Michigan. It's getting beat by Michigan State. And it's getting beat by Michigan State a couple of times in a couple of years. And I remember vividly, not the, oh, he had trouble with the snap game. I'm talking about a couple of years later, 1 or 2 years later, when they lost 14-10. Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton are standing there in the middle of a downpour. So was Michigan. John O'Corn at the helm under center. And they turned it over not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 times in a monsoon, the likes of which the Amazon rainforest would be bashful at watching. And they lost to Michigan State in Ann Arbor, 14-10. Not only that, they proceeded to go 4-6 over their next 10 games starting that day. And that spanned over the bowl game and then into the next season. And that's really where things got uncomfortable. And if you want to pinpoint it now, there are a lot of different areas you can pinpoint. But that's where people really started to sour to a much larger degree than they had previously on Jim Harbaugh. And so you know how the next couple of years go. And we understand that eventually you're trying to get to a conclusion here, one way or the other. If you're a college football fan, I mean, if it's going to work out, great. If it's not going to work out, show me something definitively. And boy, this is where we crescendo. Because it's time, and it's finally time. We only got one Dorothy left. And Bill Paxton looks at Helen Hunt, and he says, we got to make it happen. This is it. Last time, and they go chase down that F5, and they cut up the Pepsi cans, and they weigh the pack, and then one of them gets wasted, and then he loads it in the back of the truck, drives the truck into the F5. Dorothy's flying, but we may be too. Because as EF5 tornadoes tend to do, it takes a jarring right turn and heads right for them. So what do? Well, they find some random pipes that go down about 30 feet, and they anchor to them, because if you do that, you might have a chance. And that's where they are. Now, here's the good part. They survive. And all's well that ends well. And not only do they win by surviving, they also make Dorothy fly, and it changes atmospheric science forever. And right now, that's where Jim Harbaugh is. I mean, that man stood on the podium last week and said, and I quote, we're going to beat Ohio State or we're going to die trying. And so they are absolutely at Michigan right now in the final scene of Twister. It was a happy ending there. but they just came off a 2-4 season at Michigan. Everything was sort of restructured to send a very loud message this past summer and this past spring, and remember the whole contract drama, to say, we're keeping you here, but there is no long rope. We're not extending anything. We're not cementing ourselves into anything. You've got to get it done this year. Now, at least the good news is everyone gets it. The fans get it. I think the coaching staff gets it. There's a lot of pressure. You get paid a lot of money. It's a privilege to coach under that pressure, but that's where they are. Now, I hope, for the sake of Michigan fans, that things turn out happy, but you got to go through that tornado to do it. You got to go through the Big Ten to do it. You're going to be an underdog against Washington. You're going to be an underdog a few times this year before you even play Ohio State. And there are several critical factors that have to fall into place here. Quarterback's got to get worked out. Hopefully, J.J. McCarthy gets to show you what he can do eventually. But it's not just a quarterback thing. They got to get a lot faster. They got to leverage the speed, the perimeter speed at wide receiver they have. They've got to do it. I felt and still do feel like Josh Gaddis may have been the right button to push, bringing in as an offensive coordinator. But he's not walking into Alabama. He came from Bama. You walk into Michigan, you don't have 4 eventual first rounders just chilling in your wide receiver room. That's a little bit different world. You walk into Michigan, you got to go find them yourself. And then in Xavier Worthy's case, you got to make sure that they're on campus when you start the season. So worthy or no worthy, Michigan's got enough horses to compete. They got to do more than compete, because you're not paying the guy what you're paying him to compete. And you don't want to just compete if you're Michigan. So I'm sitting there watching Twister the other day, and I realized, my goodness, might I already know how things work out for Jim Harbaugh in Michigan?